The year was 1922. The place, Egypt, in the Valley of the Kings. Howard Carter, the archaeologist, and his patron, Lord Carnarvon, assembled with invited dignitaries for the opening of the sealed door to the burial chamber of the tomb Carter had discovered. As Howard Carter told it, one thought, and only one, was possible. There before us lay the sealed door, and with its opening we were to blot out the centuries and stand in the presence of a king who had reigned 3,000 years ago. My own feelings as I mounted the platform were a strange mixture, and with trembling hand I struck the first blow. An astonishing sight revealed what to all appearance was a solid wall of gold. What they saw was the golden great shrine. They had not even reached the burial chamber of the dead king. Wondrous riches awaited them, and they could hardly believe their good fortune in discovering what is now known to be the only tomb of a pharaoh that had remained intact and untouched for thousands of years. Of course, in that new era of the press and radio news, the discovery created a sensation, as well it should. Egyptomania swept the world, and all manner of goods were named for King Tut. The news of the tomb fostered a great new interest in ancient Egypt. The celebrated gold and riches of the tomb and the excitement of the discovery amaze us even today. Overcome with astonishment at the sheer quantity of precious material, we may neglect to notice how extraordinary the works from within the tomb are as works of art. You've seen it many times, no doubt. You may even have a Halloween mask of it like I do, I confess. But do you really understand what it represents and why it is so magnificent as art? It's not so simple, and the backstory is fascinating. This is one of the greatest works of Egyptian art, and it lay closest to the mummified remains of the king. It's iconic and freighted with associations. It was an exalted object with a purpose to ensure the resurrection of the king. As you saw with our earlier discussion of Khafre, the funerary art of Egypt had a distinct purpose, far beyond remembrance of dead loved ones. The art had a role in their religion, in the ideology that supported kingship, and in reinforcing the hierarchy of society. So the images you see have a lot to tell us. They give us a history not only of Egyptian political succession, but of artistic style and religious belief. I've always been amazed by how much one such object can tell you about a culture. So let's take a closer look at the mask, and let's see how the story begins and ends. You're looking at the face of a young man. He was, in reality, not much more than a boy. Tutankhamun, often called the Boy King, was around 19 when he died. You can see his face here is smooth and almost heart-shaped. He has a short, tapered and delicate chin, large almond eyes, and high cheekbones with rounded cheeks. His lips are full and sensuous, but not too wide. They're almost bow-shaped and full, like a baby's pucker. Now, the points that indent deeply at the end of the lips seem to give him a serene look, one that is almost but not quite a smile. No worries wrinkle his smooth brow or line his eyes. The distance between his nose and his lips, where the philtrum, that indentation above the upper lip, is carved, is very small, as is the distance between the lower lip and the chin. His nose has a thin bridge and a wider end, and it's straighter and smaller than an adult man's. From the side, it's slightly upturned. These proportions are all characteristics of a youth, a child. Yet they are those of a very elegant youth, sophisticated, delicate, and fine-boned. Tutankhamun has the same hazy, far-away gaze that we saw in Khafre's statue. He's perfect and still, and no movement mars his expression. In effect, this is as eternal, youthful, and healthy a face as you can create. It is beautiful, it's also deceiving. From examination of the mummy and its DNA, the former Antiquities Minister of Egypt, Zahi Hawass, and his medical team have determined that Tutankhamun may have had a cleft lip, a club foot, and suffered from malaria. He died at 19, according to them, from a combination of malaria and necrosis of his leg. He was a proud product of the practice of royal sister-brother incest, so his immune system may have been weaker than most and led him to succumb to an early death. In fact, he only had one set of grandparents because his father and his mother were full siblings. That could really simplify your holidays. Tutankhamun was buried with many walking staffs, which some scholars believed were a symbol of office, but Hawass and the doctors who examined his mummy believe he actually needed them to walk. So the image of the perfect, ideal, youthful, and muscular king with faculties far outpacing the common man had to be conjured by the artist. It had to fit in with 2,000 years of Egyptian tradition concerning the king. When you look at this almost heartbreakingly beautiful face, no thought of physical ills can cross your mind. The gold, the flesh of the gods, glows with divine light, and the inlaid blue eyebrows and cosmetic line around the eyes accent sinuous and really stunning features. This small part of the face and the golden ears are all that you see of the king's actual features, however. The rest of the mask and the series of coffins in which he was buried are replete with paraphernalia that emphasizes his role as king. And much of that had not changed in the intervening 2 millennia since the time of the Old Kingdom. For instance, Tutankhamun wears the same Nemes headcloth that signified kingship for Khafre and others. Tut's headcloth is merged seamlessly with his face. It consists of gold inlaid with stripes of blue paste intended to resemble lapis lazuli. It is knotted in back. Tut also wears the false beard customary for kings, which is inlaid in cloisonné with blue in a herringbone pattern outlined in gold. On his brow is the kingly uraeus, the cobra wajet representing Lower Egypt, combined with the vulture neckbet of Upper Egypt. The combination of the two is symbolic of his domination of both lands. That is strikingly similar to the Narmer-Palett's message of control of both halves of Egypt. The cobra and vulture are colorfully inlaid with semi-precious stones and glass, including turquoise, carnelian, obsidian, and lapis. Tut also wears an elaborate broad collar that ends at each shoulder with a gold falcon head, the symbol of Horus. The rows of the necklace are composed of lapis, quartz, amazonite, and colored glass. The interplay of curving striped collar and rhythmically striped nemes is very pleasing and really quite complex. This mask is complete by itself, and the broad collar has the function of ending it gracefully. The mask lay the closest to the mummy's shaved and bandaged head. It was filled with unguents and oils used in the mummification process. The mask is inscribed with a magic formula of protection. It's on the shoulders and the back. We see protective inscriptions on the coffins as well. After the mask was put on the mummy of the king, he was placed in a gold mummiform coffin, which was in turn placed into 2 more gilded wood coffins. The shape of these coffins echoed that of Osiris, ruler of the underworld. The innermost coffin of gold was even more complex in its imagery and construction than the mask, whose features it repeats. Tut wears the nemes and the uraeus, though the stripes are now solid gold and not blue. He, of course, wears the false beard of kingship, and his arms are crossed at the bejeweled wrists on his chest. His hands hold more symbols of kingship, the Heka scepter and the Nekaka flail. These are such clear symbols of kingship that their meaning is understood even today. We saw the flail on the Narmer pallet. Another beautiful and graceful element of the coffin has a further symbolic meaning. The enfolding wings of the vulture neckbet and the cobra wadjet in a bird's body seem to protect the king in death, and they hold the protective Shen sign in their claws. The wings are intricately patterned in cloisonné filled with different colored stones. The rest of the gold coffin is hammered and chased, or incised, with designs of wings, scales, stripes, and other shapes. This extraordinary coffin of solid gold weighs 110 kilograms, or 250 pounds. What I find interesting is that the use of such large quantities of gold and of lapis lazuli to indicate hair is very similar to what we saw in the royal cemetery at Ur some 1,000 years earlier. Presumably, the great kings who ruled before Tut were buried in even greater splendor, with even richer and more elaborate grave goods, but their graves were looted long ago, unfortunately. Otherwise, we might find similar coffins, masks, and symbolism. The emphasis on power and eternal life was inherently part of a king's hold on his people. The funerary rites and burials involving such a great show of wealth enhanced the power and the glory of the office of the king. The fact that gold was disposed of in such stupendous quantity must have really impressed the people. This sort of burial also must have meant there was enormous wealth and plenty of gold to be had in Egypt. Who was Tutankhamun? How did he fit into the larger Egyptian picture? Tutankhamun was not a king of great importance. He was a boy who ruled only 9 or 10 years in the New Kingdom from the time he was about 9 years old. His early and untimely death had practically erased his existence from Egyptian memory, which is probably the reason his tomb had not been looted like every other. The dazzling contents of the tomb nag at us, and we wonder, what did the truly great kings like Ramses the Great have buried with them? It's thought that Tut died before his tomb was sufficiently prepared, and his successor had him buried swiftly in a modest tomb meant for someone else. Tut was born in the New Kingdom, 1550 to 1070 BC, the time of greatest flowering of the Egyptian Empire. His birth name was actually Tutankhaten, reflecting the solar cult of Aten, emphasized by his father, the famous so-called monotheistic or heretic king Akhenaten. Under Tut's grandfather, Amenhotep III, who ascended to the throne in 1390 BC, war and art flourished, and Egypt's empire extended from the Euphrates in Syria to the Nile's fourth cataract in Nubia, where the gold was mined. Some of the most magnificent accomplishments belong to Amenhotep III's era, including the largest funerary complex at Thebes, which we know now only from the famed colossi of Memnon. The son of Amenhotep III, though, was a different sort. He was born Amenhotep IV, but changed his name to Akhenaten in the 5th year of his reign. He is depicted as the strange and seemingly distorted figure who started a new religious movement, Atenism. He founded a new capital, Akhetaten, and encouraged a new art style that departed from the standards of 2,000 years. This style we call the Amarna style, after the location of the newly founded capital. Akhenaten replaced the earlier gods Amun, chief amongst them, with worship of the sun disk called the Aten. The cults and the priesthood of Amun were attacked and replaced. Akhenaten started a new art style to express his new beliefs, which embodied the notion that he was the child and the personification of the sun on earth. This new style, which some call naturalistic, but which is quite mannered and exaggerated in many ways, although more fluid and personal, was adopted by his artists. The style made use of an elongated, elegant, and sinuous line, and some of the subject matter of the art was new. It emphasized more intimate and immediate personal scenes of the family of the pharaoh, animals, and especially beautiful horses and long-necked women in the royal court appear a lot. I and other art historians see this style as mannered. In other words, it has some parallels to the style of the 16th century Italian mannerists, like that of Parmigianino or Bronzino. They painted highly stylized figures with exaggeratedly long and curving limbs. That was in contrast to the strict classical proportions that preceded them. Just like the Amarna artists threw off the strict canons of proportions in Egyptian art and created a new and more expressive style. Nefertiti, Akhenaten's wife, seems to have wielded great power. She's shown with an entirely new crown and is engaged in kingly activities like smiting an enemy. Most interestingly, Akhenaten had himself depicted with feminized and strangely distorted features, narrow shoulders, a long face, a small waist, pot belly, and swelling thighs. Doctors really enjoyed speculating on a disease he might have had and making a diagnosis. But now that his mummy has been found and examined, it turns out that he seems to have been perfectly normal. So the style in which he had himself depicted was a religious statement. Akhenaten wanted to have the characteristics of both male and female in order to express his centrality in the religion. He was the living manifestation of the sun deity, the Aten, on earth. Akhenaten and Nefertiti were the parents of 6 daughters. One of them, named Akhenaten, later changed to Tutankhamun, was married to Tut. Tut mysteriously seems not to have been the son of Akhenaten by Nefertiti or his secondary wife, but according to the DNA, is the son of Akhenaten and his so far nameless full sister. Brother-sister incest was famously the Egyptian means of maintaining the royal bloodline intact, but unfortunately it had serious genetic repercussions for Tut and others. Tut was married to his half-sister, and he was buried with 2 fetuses, which DNA tests suggested were his children. They were not brought to term, and perhaps couldn't be because of genetic defects. Sadly, Tut's own early demise might have been linked to those weaknesses attributed to incest. He ruled only 10 years, and in that time, older officials had to be making the real decisions. And one of those decisions was to return to the old ways and the religion of Amun, hence the change in the name of the pharaoh. The city of Akhenaten was abandoned, and the royals returned to the earlier royal residence in Memphis. But let's go back to Tut's tomb and its contents, for they can tell us more about the boy king and his history and life. When Sir Howard Carter glimpsed the golden wall through his hole into the burial chamber, what he actually saw was this: the golden shrine which held the sarcophagus and nested coffins of the king. This shrine was immense, 17 by 11 feet and 9 feet high. It filled the burial chamber completely. Carter had a difficult time entering it. When they threw open the doors, a second gilt wooden shrine lay within, and a third and a fourth. A smaller shrine of gold had been found in the antechamber. That one was meant to contain a golden statue of the king. Charming scenes were incised into the sheet gold: hunting trips of Tut and his wife, boating in the marshes, that sort of pleasurable activity. Those scenes seemed to capture some of the love and intimacy between husband and wife. For instance, She presents him with arrows to shoot from his bow, anoints him with perfumed oils, and in general seems to hover and dote upon him. Remember, they're also siblings, and Tut is shown seated, perhaps in deference to his malformed foot. The scenes have symbols of regeneration, like lotuses and birds, which are meant to transmit royal power, encouraging rebirth in the realm of the afterworld. One of the most famous and masterful works from the tomb is the throne of Tutankhamun. It's wood-covered with gold leaf, set with semi-precious stones and colored glass. It shows some scenes similar to the shrines, recalling the height of the Amarna style. On the backrest, you see young King Tut leaning back on his chair with one elbow, while his wife Tutankhamun bends forward to touch him. She may be anointing him with perfumed oil taken from the vessel she holds. This gesture is both intimate and touching. The gaze between the two seems to radiate love and affection, which was meant to carry forward into the renewed life after death. The queen is wearing a silver dress and Tut a silver kilt. Both wear elaborate colored broad collars. Tut's kilt shows an extraordinary cloisonné detail of colored stones. Their flesh is made of red glass, setting them off against the golden background. Both wear blue wigs topped by elaborate crowns. They even have the flying neck scarves we see frequently on Nefertiti and Akhenaten. You can also see the Amarna stylistic influence on the soft flesh of Tut. His rounded belly rests upon his kilt. His neck is long and thin. His elongated fingers are elegant and stylized. In another harking back to his father's religion, the sun disk or Aten above them reaches its rays down to them. The rays end in hands. The ones closest to the king and queen offer them the Ankh sign, the breath of life. This whole scene takes place in a space defined by a colorful, pillared pavilion. The goldwork and inlay are unparalleled. I also want to point out that the king's throne bears other distinctly royal insignia. The lion heads at the ends of the seat, remember khafres, the lion paws for feet, and the outstretched wings of a serpent being form the arms and protect the cartouches of the king. The Semitawi symbol of the unification of the two lands is now lost, but it once connected the legs. The back of the throne has their original names, combining the Aten form still in them. Another particularly noteworthy object found within the tomb was a painted wooden chest. It has scenes extolling the king's virtues in warfare. It was found in the antechamber of the tomb. On one side, the large figure of the king is portrayed riding in his two-horse chariot, shooting an arrow at a jumble of Nubians. They are arranged in a chaotic mess at the left of the frame. Many seem to be trampled under the chariot, while others lack any order and gesticulate as if wounded or falling. In contrast, behind the king are three orderly rows of his army. Chariot and infantry back him up. This is another example of the Egyptian king's role in not only dispatching his enemies to the south, but putting order into the world. The Nubians represent the forces of chaos and the enemies to the south. Note that even his hunting dogs are attacking the enemy. This device of having enemies under the chariot had been in use for 2,000 years at the time this was made. Recall the standard of Ur and the trampling of Narmer's enemies? The light war chariot was something new in the New Kingdom. It was quite probably brought in by the Hyksos, a foreign people now living in Egypt, and was as much an item of status as it was of warfare. Elaborate real chariots were actually found in Tut's tomb, and they give us a good insight into the technology of their vehicles at this time. Horses were fairly new as well, and are a favorite subject for New Kingdom art. They were expensive and they showed high status, just like today, and they were extremely useful in war and, of course, in transport. Other objects in the tomb include the canopic chest of Tut, made of alabaster. This is where the eviscerated organs were embalmed and stored in 4 separate canopic jars. Each jar bore an image of the head of the king, carved in white alabaster, painted with accents about the eyes, lips, uraeus, and vulture. You can see the resemblance here in these delicate portraits to the coffin and mask of the king. He also wears the same nemes. The jars were set within this alabaster chest, which in turn was put inside a large gilt shrine. Gilt goddesses guarded the contents of the shrine. Selket was one of the 4 goddesses, carved and gilded, who guarded this shrine. She was guardian of the intestines and was associated with scorpions. She was thought to have healing powers against venomous bites. You can see the scorpion on her head. Note that her head turns to the side in a more immediate, natural manner than usually seen in Egyptian funerary art. Her figure also has the swelling forms, thighs and belly, together with tiny waist and naturalistic breasts that are typical of Amarna art. Thousands of spectacular objects were found in Tut's tomb, so it's extremely difficult to decide which are most noteworthy. Besides the fantastic jewels found on the body of the king, there were a number of pieces of furniture, like this couch, bearing the carved image of the cow deity with the sun disk between its horns. There were 3 of these couches, each with an animal as its insignia. One is lion-headed, this one bovine, and another a mixture of traits. But I find the naturalism of these cows particularly appealing. There's also a great statue of the king on the back of a walking leopard. The leopard seems to be conducting the king in his white crown of Upper Egypt into the underworld. It's interesting that the leopard is completely black. It's an unusual mutation called a melanistic leopard. For this reason, his completely black fur, the idea of that leopard walking into the underworld is appropriate. As far as I know, this has not been pointed out before. One of the most famous animals associated with the tomb was Anubis, the jackal, who lies here atop a chest. He's painted black and also gilded. He is, above all, a funerary god who guides the corpse through the process of mummification, then on to the afterworld. Jackals, as nocturnal animals, are appropriate to this role, of course. Lastly, I'd like to introduce you to the art of tomb painting, which reached its apex at Thebes in the Western Desert. Tut's tomb, though not originally meant for him, had a series of very enlightening scenes that help us understand his reign and funerary customs. Here you see the king standing before the goddess Hathor, who holds the Ankh sign to his lips. Behind him is the figure of Anubis, this time a jackal-headed man, whose hand rests upon his shoulder as he guides him to the underworld and renewal. The swelling belly of the Amarna age is evident on Tut. On the north wall, we see the scene with a series of people. At the right is Tut's successor Ai, wearing the leopard skin which signifies a priest. He performs the opening of the mouth ritual in front of the mummy. This act reanimates it. Then we see in the center Tut and the sky goddess Nut. The last grouping of 3 figures shows Tutankhamun in the center, as you see, in his nemes, embracing the welcoming underworld god Osiris. The figure behind Tut is his Ka, or life force, or soul. It seems that King I must have had this scene painted, since it's unusual for the succeeding royal to have himself represented in the tomb of the deceased king. Note how much the dead king here looks like his mummy mask that we've just examined. His appearance is remarkably consistent from one object to the next. This is a sign of the extremely careful and controlled output of the workshop of royal artists. Nevertheless, customs change, and tomb painting becomes one of the highest arts in the New Kingdom. In our next lecture, we'll be looking at the tomb of a queen, one which is surpassingly beautiful and complex.